There's no sugarcoating it. Alfa Romeo have made some subpar cars, to put it gently. They rust, leave you stranded, and if you're lucky, occasionally burst into flames. With a strong reputation for unreliability, corporate chaos, and financial turmoil, Alfa should have been buried deep in the ground decades ago, but somehow they prevail. As one of the oldest car brands to ever exist, what exactly is it that keeps Alfa alive, despite all of their shortcomings? How is Alfa Romeo still so cool? To really figure that out, the best place to start is at the concept of cool itself. What does it even mean to be cool? The word cool has existed in the English language for thousands of years, originally as a way to describe low temperatures. But even in Old English, people began to use the word metaphorically. A cool head meaning someone calm under pressure. But the meaning of the word cool that we know today derived from 1940s American jazz culture. Musicians like Miles Davis, Lester Young, and Duke Ellington used cool to describe a style that was smooth, understated, and emotionally restrained, the opposite of being loud and showy. Then Hollywood brought that feeling onto the big screen. James Dean, Marlon Brando, and Steve McQueen embodied this new definition of the word cool. These characters were self-assured, calm, collected, but more notably, often flawed in some sense or another. Cool has since birthed many different interpretations, but has always maintained that perhaps imperfect but self-assured quiet confidence. So where does Alfa fit into all of this? Now, despite cool not really being a tangible thing defined by one definition, one thing that we can be sure of is that Alfa definitely tick the imperfect box. As I mentioned earlier, Alfa have made some shit cars. They've also had their fair share of very uncool moments. Take the Alfa Romeo Arna, a joint effort between Alfa and Nissan after Alfa ran out of money, again. Now, on paper, this sounds quite promising. Italian flair and passion combined with Japanese build quality and craftsmanship. That all sounds great, but for reasons beyond my comprehension, they decided to do it the other way round. The resulting car was widely agreed as being pretty terrible. Much like many old and flawed cars, it's since begun to pick up a bit of a cult following. Some even arguing it wasn't that bad at all, but overall, not the best effort from Alfa and probably a stretch to call the Arna cool. But don't be fooled into thinking that an Alfa just needs to be objectively good to be considered cool. Take the 8C. While it was a better car than the Arna, it performed like a sloppy mess compared with Porsche's equivalent 911. A clunky gearbox, subpar handling, all wrapped in classic Alfa unreliability, a recipe for disaster. But it was adored. The 8C is potentially one of the coolest cars to ever exist, and though journalists were quick to highlight its flaws, most fell in love with the beauty and emotion the 8C brought to the table, particularly from that Ferrari-derived V8. And how can you hate it when it looks like that? The 8C was proof that Alfas aren't just loved because they're flawed. I've discussed this general topic in a previous video. It's a common misconception that cars like Alfas only gain popularity because they're flawed. Basically the idea that being a bit shit gives them character. I'm not really a fan of this ideology, but I think for the most part, it's a pretty reductive argument, particularly in the case of Alfa. There's a lot more to an Alfa than just electrical fires and rust. Moving on to Alfa's clearest and most obvious source of coolness, their beauty. Alfa seems to know something about design that the rest of the world just doesn't get. Even researching for this script took me twice as long because I got sucked into a deep rabbit hole staring at old Alfas on Google Images. They absolutely ooze cool in a way that no matter how long I tried, I couldn't quite put my finger on, let alone articulate into words. But interestingly, this seems to be an acquired taste for the most part. Alfas in general are more if you know sort of cars. You need to be surrounded in the car culture to really fully appreciate them and all their beauty. They're actually quite comparable to high fashion and runways. Shown to someone outside the fashion world and it may look uninteresting or sometimes even ridiculous, but speak to a real fashion nerd and they're infatuated. Alfas are in some respects high fashion cars, and as an enthusiast, that makes them even cooler. Not only are Alfas cool, but it's cool to like Alfas. If you're a regular viewer, you probably hear me talk a lot about how EVs, while very capable and in many ways superior, are somewhat boring compared to internal combustion driven cars. And this isn't news to any enthusiast. EVs are quiet, clinical, and practical. They make complete logical sense, and to many owners, they're great. But us humans are highly emotional beings, and EVs, despite being made for us, are not emotional cars. Alfa, for the most part, are the complete opposite of EVs. They aren't at all rational, instead fueled by passion. They won't sell you numbers, reliability, or really anything genuinely useful in the real world, but they will sell you an emotional experience. Beauty, passion, engine note, and handling feel have little to zero practical use, but they make us feel a certain way, and within reason, that's what counts if you really love cars. Or I suppose with anything if you really think about it. If we strip ourselves of the need to brag about numbers and prove that our car is faster than our neighbours, does an electrically powered sub 2 second 0 to 60 time really mean anything at all if it doesn't make you feel much while doing it? Not really, no. It's just excess bragging rights. And as we discovered earlier, a fundamental part of being cool is self-assurance. No need to brag. Now, every car falls somewhere on this clinical to emotional sliding scale, regardless of its powertrain. EVs are just the easiest example to use, as they usually fall very high up on the clinical end, and Alfa often end up on the opposite side. They stayed romantic in a rational world. The most interesting point about this sliding scale of emotion and rationality is that to some degree, where each car falls on this scale is subjective to an individual's preference. Perhaps you love the razor's edge experience of a rear-wheel drive setup, or maybe rally's your thing and all-wheel drive makes you feel more joy. Perhaps you're not into cars at all, and usually in this case, an Alfa looks like a pretty terrible offering. The only emotion an Alfa will bring someone who doesn't really understand it is hatred after it disintegrates into an orange pile of rusty dust after 2 weeks of ownership. This is where we really start to see what makes Alfas cool. They're not trying to be anything they're not, and they're not trying to please everyone. It is unapologetically itself, flaws included, and it doesn't really need to brag about anything. It knows that if you love Alfas, you'll fall for its characterful exhaust note, stunning looks, and delicate handling. And if you don't, then who cares, I suppose? Cool. And this is what stereotypically its creators, the Italians, are known for: passion. A cool Alfa is the personification of its creator. It feels very human and personal, like you're getting a handwritten love letter from the person who built it, but in the form of a car. In a world of mass-produced cars built to suit as wide an audience as possible, that's actually quite refreshing. I should stress though that this is a general ideology of Alfa Romeo, historically anyway. They have deviated from this a number of times, and even Alfa themselves make an EV before you type all your angry comments. If I showed you this prancing horse, most people's first thought is a beloved Italian supercar maker called Ferrari. But what most people have forgotten, or just didn't know, is that Alfas were the first to wear this badge of honour, and in many respects paved the way for Ferrari. In fact, Ferrari likely wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for Alfa. Back in 1920, Ferrari's founder Enzo Ferrari began his racing career with Alfa Romeo. While Enzo was a very respectable racing driver, where he really excelled was in racing team management. In 1929, Enzo founded Scuderia Ferrari, but not to build Ferraris, as a racing outfit driving Alfa Romeos. So Ferrari established its name, driving Alfa Romeos, and they were more than dominant. By the 1930s, Alfa was known not just for being good, but for being so good they made racing a bit boring. They just couldn't stop winning, and they weren't really pushed out of the spotlight until the late 1930s, when the Germans started to dominate. After World War II, Alfa came back swinging. In the 1950s, they dusted off their pre-war Grand Prix car and absolutely dominated for 2 years straight, winning every single race they entered bar one. Their motorsport heritage is rich and would make for an entire YouTube video alone. There are plenty of brilliant videos out there that go into more depth if you are interested. I do also have to give a quick mention to the 155, possibly one of the coolest race cars to ever exist. So with all of this in mind, it actually becomes quite clear what makes Alfas cool. An amalgamation of human-like imperfection, passion, heritage, and a keen eye for beauty, particularly in the eyes of those with an acquired taste. But most importantly, Alfa are at their coolest when they are unapologetically themselves.